come on in and get your seats quietly. Do you have a... No? There's no... You have your thingy over there? All right, you get this. You can stay. All right, all right. They all work, yes. All right, we'll just get started. You can all just come in quietly. So thank you for rejoining us. We're going to start the main presentations. And to start off, I'd like to welcome Dr. Rick Bedlack and his presentation, ALS Untangled, Help for the Internet Buyers Club.
Good morning, everyone. Apologies in advance if I don't smile as much today as I usually do. I was out walking around this beautiful city last night, and it was quite cold, and my face actually froze solid, and it's not completely thawed out yet. But I do appreciate the invitation to talk about one of my passion projects, which is ALS Untangled, and I call this talk Help for the Internet Buyers Club. So a little bit of background. I've been coming to this meeting now for 23 years, I believe, and it's great to see that every year we make progress and there's new options. Unfortunately, I would say that each option, maybe with the exception of tofersen, produces an incremental benefit. I think someday these are all going to add up. It will be making a big dent in this disease. But for now, people with this disease, unfortunately, many of them have rapidly progressive disability and a shortened survival. And so it's not at all surprising that people living with ALS, I'll abbreviate that PALS, they want access to experimental therapies. Of course they do. And we should understand that there are different pathways for getting that access. Clinical trials, expanded access programs, and self-experimentation with a group of products that I call alternative and off-label treatments. And so my favorite pathway for my patients to access experimental therapies is through clinical trials. Why? Well, we know a lot about the products. We know that they have plausible mechanisms of action. We know about their purity. There's an informed consent process. There's a lot of oversight from the FDA, from the IRB, from data safety monitoring boards, so that patient safety is protected. There's rigorous data collection, so we all learn something. The field moves forward when people experiment through clinical trials. And there are benefits to people who participate in clinical trials. Hope, my new favorite topic. Someday I'd like to come back and talk to you about the things I've learned about hope. Altruism. And there are also medical benefits. Interestingly, across almost every disease where this has been studied, people who participate in clinical trials, they do better medically than those who don't. Maybe it's the hope factor. Maybe it's all the measurements that get made in clinical trials. But clinical trials aren't perfect. There's certainly not nearly enough of them. As we've talked about, there's a very marked geographic restriction in where these are available. We know that clinical trials often have inclusion-exclusion criteria. And in my experience, these are getting more and more narrow as we start to target subsets of the disease that we think might respond to a particular therapy, meaning more people are excluded. And there are also certain design features that are not acceptable to many PALs. For example, placebos, and also the travel burden that's associated with a lot of these. And so it's been nice to see that expanded access programs have become more common in ALS over the last few years. I think this is a great option, at least theoretically, for people who can't get into trials, but unfortunately there aren't nearly enough of these either. There's even fewer expanded access programs than there are trials. And these are even more restricted in terms of where they're offered. And even with expanded access programs, there are often inclusion-exclusion criteria. And so that leaves the third pathway, which I call self-experimentation. And some studies out there suggest that most, maybe up to 99% of people with ALS around the world are using this pathway. And there's different specific ways to use it. You could get a prescription for an off-label medication from your doctor. You could go through an importation program to get something from another country. You could find a guru And you could buy from that guru. These are called buyers clubs, and they've been around at least since the early days of HIV. There's a great 2013 movie with Matthew McConaughey, a person living with HIV who created his own buyers club in a motel room in Texas. Most commonly nowadays, people find their products that they're going to experiment with through the internet. And there's so many products now on the internet. If you take out your phone and you Google ALS treatments, you'll come up with probably over 100,000 hits. Now, not all of the things you come up with are alternative or off-label treatments, but many of them are. And the thing about the internet, there's a lot of breadth, but there's very little depth to what's on there. And there aren't any internet police to hold people accountable for what they claim. So here's a screenshot from a product that one of my patients asked me about a few years ago, Mototab. It claims to be the world's most relied upon treatment for motor neuron disease. It claims to be clinically proven. It claims to be completely guaranteed. You're at no risk for trying this product. What kind of information was offered at all those links? None. They were all dead ends. And so I heard some chuckles when I put that up there, and it does seem a little silly, except for the fact that people are actually being harmed by pursuing alternative and off-label therapies on the internet. They're being financially harmed. Some of these products cost hundreds, some cost thousands, some cost hundreds of thousands of dollars per treatment. They're being physically harmed. My team has found evidence of infections, blood clots, tumors, people who have gone and purchased stem cells off the grid and came back and developed a tumor. And when that was biopsied, it was comprised of someone else's cells. So what they actually bought were precancerous cells. There have even been deaths in some of these clinics that have continued to advertise themselves as perfectly safe. There's also a scientific harm, because many times I see patients who would be good candidates for a trial or an expanded access program, but instead they decide to self-experiment based on one of these claims from an unusual website, and that harms our enrollment. We don't enroll very well in ALS trials. We enroll about 2 patients per site per month in a trial. And a busy site like mine, we will see 80 to 100 patients in a month, and 2 will enroll in a clinical trial. And you know, that's not good, because it means that our trials are taking longer, they're more expensive, they might be terminated without a result. The bottom line is, because of this, it's going to take us longer to find the cure for ALS than it should. And so, frustrated by all this, in 2009, I got together at this international symposium in the corner with some of my colleagues, and I said, we need to do something about this. And there wasn't really a precedent, so we just kind of brainstormed this idea that we would put together a team of clinicians and scientists that would systematically assess these products. Ultimately, our goal was to help PALS make more informed decisions about them. And this system has evolved over the years, but there's still 3 parts to it. Inputs, where we get our ideas. Investigations or reviews, how we actually decide what to say. And then outputs, how do we get the information back out there? And it all revolves around a website, alsuntangled.com, .net, .org. We own all those domain names. But the key thing is that our inputs come from people living with ALS around the world. They come through emails, they come through social media, they come from my colleagues in different places who say, I saw a patient today and he asked about this. Could you put it on your list? And so once we have an idea, we put it on the future reviews section of our website. And I can't possibly get a screenshot of all the ideas that are on that page right now. There's over 500 of them. There's far more ideas than I will ever get to in my life. So we've had to come up with a way to prioritize the ideas. And we do it in different ways. First, we let the community vote. So if you see something on that page you're interested in, just go on there and click the vote button, and it moves up 1 notch. But votes can't be the only way that we prioritize. The reason is that some of these things have no useful disclosable information. So if somebody asks me about a clinic somewhere that has no information on their website, and I reach out to the proponent and they say, if you write 1 word, I'll sue you, we're not going to get very far on that investigation. So we have a multiplier. Most things get multiplied by 1, so it's all about the votes. Some things get multiplied by a 0 if we can't find any useful disclosable information. Occasionally, we multiply the votes by 2. That's if there is a published case series or trial. We put together a team, and that team keeps growing. There's now more than 130 clinicians and scientists from across 11 countries working on this every day. And we've had to invent standard operating procedures that try to make everything we do as objective as possible, from how we gather information to how we write, crowdsource, and ultimately publish our drafts. And our standard operating procedures revolve around something we invented and refined over the years called the table of evidence. So we want to know 5 things about each of these products. What's the mechanistic plausibility? What is this thing supposed to do? And does that make any sense based upon what we know about the laws of physics and biology? What does this thing do when it's given to a preclinical model of ALS, a cell or an animal model? What are people who tried it saying? And can we actually prove that those are real people? Can we get their medical records and verify what they're saying? Are there any trials that we can reference? And what bad things could possibly happen to a person who tries this? And how likely are those? And across each of these 5 categories, we assign a letter grade, ranges from A to F. And so just to give you an example of how this works, look at the category case reports. If all we can find are people saying, I tried this, it doesn't do anything, it's going to get an F. If we can find one person on the internet who says they tried it and it gave them benefits, but we can't prove that they're real, we'll give it a D. If we can communicate with that person and get their medical records and verify their diagnosis and their improvement after trying this, it gets a C. If there's more than one person like that, it gets a B. And if there's a published series of patients like that, it gets an A. And once we have a rough draft, we send it out across the world to our ALS Untangled team. That's called crowdsourcing. Everybody gets 2 weeks to send back their comments, and then I have the difficult job of trying to figure out how to incorporate all these comments into the review that we send to the journal, ALS and Frontotemporal Degeneration. That version gets an independent peer review. We respond to that, and then we get published. All of our reviews are published through something called free open access, which means nobody ever has to pay to download them. They're also published on the completed review section of our website, along with a list of the grades that we gave that idea across the 5 categories. Now, we've been doing this for a long time. Some of these reviews are more than a decade old. We've had to update them. And so when you go to that completed review section, if you see an asterisk, that means we've updated that review and there's a new paragraph that's not in the publication. We also understand that not everybody wants to download a scientific article and read it. So we've partnered with the CREATE Consortium out of the University of Miami, and we are now recording podcasts where a person living with ALS will interview me about that idea. And if you see a little speaker icon next to the name of the idea, that means you can listen to the podcast. They tend to be 10 to 15 minutes in length. We've also learned that this hunger to self-experiment is not unique to English-speaking people. And so we've partnered with some folks in Spain and some folks in Italy, and we're now translating our reviews and our podcasts into other languages. Sounds like a lot of work, doesn't it? There pretty much hasn't been one night or one weekend in the last 15 years when I haven't, in some way, shape, or form, been working on ALS Untangled. Is it successful? Well, I'll let you be the judge. We've won some awards from patients and from peers. People are reading our reviews. So the journal that we publish in keeps an active list of its most downloaded articles. We've got 8 of the top 10 most downloaded articles in history. Some individual ALS Untangled reviews have over 50,000 downloads, and this series now has over 400,000. And the podcasts, which are pretty recent, they already have over 30,000. I can also tell you that personally, I have grown. I have learned so many interesting things from running this program, and I would love to spend the next hour telling you about all those, but I know I only have a few more minutes, so let me tell you some of the things I've learned about the products. Many of them are junk, and the worst ones that we found share the same problems. I call them the red flags. And so if a person comes into your clinic and says, what about this new thing that's just launched in Montreal, Canada, and we haven't reviewed it yet, ask yourself how many of these 10 red flags are associated with that thing. The more likely it does that this thing doesn't work and that patients should stay away. But we've also found some products that are very promising. Just recently published in the Annals of Neurology, a list of the 8 most promising products that we've reviewed in the last 15 years. And you can see those are acetyl L-carnitine, antiretrovirals, clenbuterol, L-serine, methylcobalamin, nicotinamide riboside with pterostilbene, quinidine with dextromethorphan, and tamoxifen. Each of these have plausible mechanisms by which it could affect ALS. Each has a small flawed trial demonstrating benefit in people with ALS. So to wrap it up, I've shown you today that people living with ALS understandably want experimental options. Trials and expanded access programs are the preferred pathways, but unfortunately there's not enough, and they're too geographically restricted, which means self-experimentation with AOTs is going to be the main pathway people use. When it comes to understanding these products, like they used to say on the X-Files, the truth is out there, but it's not always easy to find. And so ALS Untangled tries to bring the community together to investigate these with the ultimate goal of helping people with the disease make more informed decisions. I do want to add one wrinkle to this before I someday retire. I believe there's a need for one-on-one education for people with ALS around the world. I believe ALS Untangled needs to either partner with a 501c3 or create its own 501c3 and allow people and families to schedule one-on-one conferences with an expert to talk about their questions and get them answered someday. So just want to wrap up by thanking people living with ALS. You're literally the reason I'm still here in this field fighting. You inspire me to fight harder every day. My sponsors, ALS Untangled currently only has one sponsor, that's the ALS Association. So thank you for helping us to continue to put out 6 reviews a year. I'd like to thank all my collaborators, especially the unpaid volunteers that are members of my team. And then lastly, my Duke ALS care team. They helped me build a foundation of great patient care upon which all these other ideas that I have are based. Thank you.
Thank you. This is now open for questions.
There's a question from Sue, MNDA. If you find a product that might work but has flawed results, do you advise them or point them in a better direction?
It's a complicated question. So when one of my patients comes to my clinic and says, I'm thinking about trying this thing, my first question is, I understand why you want to experiment. Let's see if I've got a trial that you can participate in. If not, let's see if we can get you in an expanded access program. And if all else fails and self-experimentation is your only option, then let's look critically at this idea that you brought. And let's ask ourselves, what does it say about the potential benefits? What are the potential risks that can come to you? And if we're both comfortable with that, then I'll support you and I'll follow you on that product and we'll see what happens.
Thank you, Dr. Bedlak, for everything that you do. Sarah Maguire from ALS Canada. I'm over here.
Hi, Sarah.
And I had the good fortune of seeing you speak about the work that you were doing shortly after I'd begun my work in 2010, and it's really inspired me. So one of the things that we actually do, and I kind of wanted to share this with anybody else in the room, one of the things that I had seen early on in my career was by the time that we had clients register with us and we'd gone out into the homes and met them, sometimes they'd already started looking and found dangerous information. So now what we do when a client is registering with us, our first reach out includes a number of resources, including the link to ALS Untangled, hoping that they can get to that before they go anywhere else. And it has been a tremendous support to us and hopefully has pointed many more people in the right direction. So I just wanted to thank you for that.
Well, thank you.
I think we have time for one more question.
Hi, my name is Lee Moore. I'm from the ALS Foundation in the Netherlands. Well, thank you for your interesting talk, and I couldn't agree more with what you just said. I think also patients have a right to this information, so it's great to show them what you're doing with ALS Untangled. We're having a webinar in the Netherlands in February on this topic, together with the Patient Association and with researchers from the ALS Center. And your slides would be very helpful. Are you able to share them with us?
Why don't you take a break?
Happy to share them, and also happy to participate if I haven't already booked myself on some other Zoom meeting that time. So just come and talk to me after. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much. Yes, very.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. And coming up next, we would like to welcome Katie Kinsella, who will be presenting NIV setup, an update on the Irish MND nursing service.
Thank you very much. Good morning. I'm very happy to be here this morning in Montreal. Chilly city as well. Got a little lost on the walk up, but managed to find our way. Got distracted by lots of nice shops and sites and buildings. So I'm here this morning to give you an update on non-invasive ventilation set up by the nursing service in the Irish Multidisciplinary Clinic. My colleague Bernie Corr, which many of you will know, originally presented this I think nearly 10 years ago in Belgium, so I'm giving you an update 13 years on. I hope I get the tech working appropriately. The green button. So I didn't get it working well. Okay, so by way of background, Ireland is a small country on the west of Europe, sorry. Got the very basics wrong, with a population of almost 5 million. We cover the Republic of Ireland. The lifetime risk of developing motor neuron disease in Ireland is about 1 in 300, the incidence being 2.7 per 100,000. And we currently have closer to 450 people with motor neuron in the Republic of Ireland. The National Motor Neuron ALS Service was set up back in 1994 by Professor Orla Hardiman. It was the first multidisciplinary clinic in the country and now offers an extensive outreach program with teaching, training, research, and is well known internationally. In 2010, as a result of financial constraints and the lack of access to inpatient admissions, the nursing service, primarily then was Bernie Corr with the backup of the Irish Motor Neuron Disease Association, started setting up non-invasive ventilation remotely in patients' place of residence, be that their homes, other regional hospitals, hospices, or nursing homes. And this was as a direct result of not being able to get inpatient access or access to beds, which remains to be an issue in Ireland. So this presentation will give you an update on how that service has developed over the recent years. So by way of background as well, our clinic, multidisciplinary in nature, Professor Orla Hardiman runs it, supported by another neurologist and several other registrar teams. We used to be Bernie Corr, which many of you I know will know. There is now 6 nurses on that service, 2 advanced nurse practitioners and 4 clinical nurse specialists. And we are supported by the Irish Motor Neuron Disease Association, and they now have a team of up to 4 nurses. You will also see there, I skipped slightly through that, we currently now have access in our service, it has grown over the years, to psychology, social work, physio, respiratory technician, not currently, but it is a goal. We link all our patients with palliative care service in the community, occupational therapy, speech and language, dietitian. So it really is a wide range of interprofessionals that we work with. And this is our carer dyad, so our patients at the centre of it, and we will care for them in their place of residence, be it home, residential care, acute setting, and the multidisciplinary service aims to meet them and interact with the community services there as well, wherever they really need it. So about 80% of Irish patients with motor neuron and ALS attend the national service. This is kind of for multiple reasons. It is a small country relative to lots of other places internationally. However, it's quite a journey, 300 miles north to south, 150 miles east to west. But there is smaller clinics available in Galway in the west, and there's a clinic in the south. But still, most of our patients will attend the service, and we run a national service as a result of that. But it's also to access trials, which Professor Hardiman runs. About 160 patients are diagnosed each year, and I told you about our nursing service. So, as well recognised and accepted, most patients with ALS-MND die from respiratory failure. And one of a distinguishing feature is how well people will, if they're offered, and how well they do on non-invasive ventilation. So, like I mentioned, in 2010, we started doing this in the home setting because we couldn't admit patients to the hospital setting to get them a trial of this. So home and clinic reviews make us aware of the patients that require, or when they're suitable patients for non-invasive ventilation. We follow the NICE guidelines with a SNP of around 50, or FVC dropping, as well as monitoring for clinical symptoms. And our outreach program allows us to regularly review our patients in their settings. We interact closely with our community colleagues and other interprofessionals, so we're aware of their symptom burden and how they're progressing. And we have an open door policy when it comes to contacting us through phone calls with the interprofessionals, with the team, with the caregivers, with families, and we ourselves do regular home visits. From a respiratory point of view, from a remote monitoring point of view, we do send out pulse oximetry. Our physio colleagues can do remote FVCs. And these assessments ensure that patients are identified and offered a timely trial of non-invasive ventilation. And we have their care needs tailored to meet their symptom burdens. So this is just a little bit of data on the amount of pulse oximeters in recent years. That it's growing all the time. The outreach element of this kind of grew as a result of COVID. I suppose we were able to get more pulse oximeters and remote monitors to send out. So it has grown from 2020 to 41 to 108 in 2023. And then the bottom set of figures there that you will see, that there was just 10 patients set up in 2010 when it was just Bernie on her own. And 2023, we haven't finalised our figures for this year yet, 93 patients were set up on non-invasive ventilation. And just to comment, as part of our COVID response, our colleagues in the Irish Motor Neuron Disease did set up non-invasive ventilation with our patients in their homes as well. So the figures reflect this. So the benefits of setting up the non-invasive ventilation service: patient comfort, symptom management, better quality of life, particularly in the home setting or in their place of residence. Feedback, and what we find is that it certainly facilitates important discussions around acute crisis management and end-of-life discussions. Allows us to form important rapport and professional relationships with our interprofessional teams in the communities. It is in line with our current health policies within Ireland for integrated care programmes with the community. And there's huge financial savings, which have been known, and that's really what facilitated Professor Hardiman's service to grow, that we could prove the financial cost savings there. So there's significant, as I said, significant evidence that NIV reduces ventilatory failure in these patients or supports it. Setting it up in the home reduces the need for hospital admissions. I felt it was important to outline that because there still are services within the Republic of Ireland that do admit acutely to the hospital setting to start non-invasive ventilation. Obviously, there's a financial burden of this, but there's a burden for the patient to leave their home setting, for care needs. An acute setting, we find, isn't the place to care for these patients, or isn't the ideal place to care for these patients. The cost saving is estimated to be about 80,000 per annum. And as I mentioned, home-based end-of-life discussions can avoid emergency admissions and unplanned initiation of possible invasive mechanical ventilation. And the cost saving of that in our setting would be approximately 13 million per annum. So recommendations to our colleagues in the field. We feel that the nurse outreach service has resulted in an increase of home visits and the number of non-invasive ventilation setups, and a significant reduction of our patients' acute admissions. The home initiation, as I said, enhances end-of-life discussions and reduces the need for admissions to an acute hospital setting. Thank you very much for your time. I probably spoke a little bit quickly and caught you by surprise there.
Well, caught me off guard. All right, so this is open for questions now. Thank you very much. Yeah, we'll just let you know, it's very hard for us to see you guys up here because there's lights in our eyes, but
Hi, I'm just wondering, what is your process if patients require additional therapy like mouthpiece ventilation, or like do you offer?
Yes, we do. My colleague, Georgia Murray is here, one of our outreach physio program, and it has grown in recent years. And yes, it is something that we do as an outreach service now as well. Well, they may be assessed in clinic, like we were open to which meets our patients' needs best. But yeah, we have a number of patients on mouthpiece ventilation, and obviously usually they would have both be assessed by physios, and then the nursing service or the physio team will go out and set up in the team. But certainly growing, and patients have found it a huge quality of life initiative, gives them great choice. Yep.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Zuccarino from Italy, ALS Association of Italy. I have a question for you. Congratulations for your job. I was wondering when you just show us setting up the non-invasive ventilation, when you go at home, you are just you or you are a little team for setting all parameters in the machine?
So a member of the prescription would come from clinic, from Professor Hardiman or one of the medical teams, or we have a respiratory physician that backs the clinic as well. So the prescription is preset. Respiratory technician from the company that we use, Respicare, but there are a number of different companies in the country, but Professor Hardiman and our clinic links with a company called Respicare. So we go with one of their technicians or nurses. They will go through the care of the machine, processes like that, and then from a nursing point of view, we educate the patients on the benefits, the reasons, the care, the use, and the possible implications for their illness. And then obviously it facilitates, like I discussed, end-of-life discussions, discussing ventilation, different types of ventilation, what to do in an acute crisis, things like that. But practically, it's a nurse usually from our team, from the multidisciplinary service, and then from the company that supplies the machine. The machine is funded by the Irish healthcare system, and most patients in Ireland get a medical card, and any long-term chronic conditions are paid for by the government through this medical card.
anyone else? Yes.
Hi, David Busek, a patient fellow. So I know that my own BiPAP has remote monitoring capabilities. So I'm curious whether you have any people who are monitoring the different patients' usage and providing any kind of real-time or semi-real-time feedback on how, whether they need changes or how things are working for them.
I'm aware that this is some other companies in the country certainly have this, if patients go on it privately or maybe from some of the other clinics. Our clinic currently doesn't do it, but it is possible. And it is something that, yeah, that each machine can have a chip and it can be monitored. We send out pulse oximetry quite regularly. As I mentioned, we see our patients either from an outreach perspective or in clinic, probably 8 weeks. You know, we did aim for 6 to 8 weeks. There is an interaction at least every so often. And we do have a telemonitoring interactive, one of my other colleagues is here, system where patients can feedback how they're doing as well. So there's multiple different, I suppose, technological ways that we're trying to get in, you know, current to day-to-day feedback from our patients. But it is possible with the service that we run as well and the machine that we use. It's not currently that we're doing it routinely, but it is possible.
Okay, there's one way in the back corner.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Donna Sickles. I'm a respiratory therapist with the ALS Hope Foundation in Philadelphia. My question is, you're going out to the patients' homes with settings that are already preset on your NIV?
Correct, prescription.
So what if the patient needs like more or less, or they're not comfortable with it?
So a little bit like the last person's question, we do follow-up monitoring. You know, we do keep in touch with how it's tolerated, how people are doing well. The beauty of the nursing services is we see these patients regularly. So routinely, if I set up a patient in the community, I am most likely in touch with them within a week and most likely seeing them again within a month. And we can change the settings without any big issues, sometimes remotely, so that is possible, you know, from the comfort settings. And from the prescription point of view, I suppose really it is how well they're doing on it and how well they tolerate it. So yes, there's tweaks made all the time.
Great, because that's the problem we have. The problem that we have are some of our patients are not wearing it early on because they're not comfortable with the mask. So
I think, maybe I didn't get that across well, I think the beauty of home setup is that we're there in their home setting with their family, with their carers. We have enough time to give them repeated trials on it, and we do get back to them quite quickly. So really, most of our patients do really well on it. Now, I don't have exact figures, and it is something we plan to audit, so we can give you feedback. But they really do take to it from these home setups. I previously worked with the IMNDA, and I attended one of the other national services, and they do still an acute setting. And certainly, our uptake rate from home setups is considerably larger than what it was in the acute setting. And there's a paper to support that from that service, Walsh et al., 2021. So you will see that the patients that were set up remotely in their home setting tolerated the machine in the long term way more.
Anyone else here? Last question, I believe.
Thank you for the great presentation. My name is Mary Faye, and I'm a nurse from ALS Clinic, Vancouver. And my question to you is, do you have any suggestions for bulbar patients who cannot tolerate the BiPAP because of sialorrhea?
Oh, as frequently as last week, I came up with this issue. It's something will all occur when we're doing it. I suppose close interprofessional relationships, we're very fortunate in Ireland in that the palliative care service work very close with us. Our colleagues are currently, one of the AMPs is working to set up Botox service. We have access to great, I suppose, symptom management treatments for this, and we try get in on top of things. In my experience, and I'm 10 years working in this field now, people that totally fail it, even bulbar patients like you've mentioned with poor secretion management, they're definitely the trickiest. I have one patient that's jumping out in my head right now, and I think he's unlikely to tolerate it for anything more than very short periods. I work closely with palliative care to try and use appropriate medication to relax and try that. Great secretion management from a physio point of view, using our cough assist, appropriate education with the family. You know, that one patient that jumps out in my head, but that's really frequent. Apart from that, I think good team interprofessional work, all the multiple factors of controlling those sialorrhea, be it pharmacological, be it with physio, be it with good timing of use, good seating. I think that's really good around the patient I'm thinking of now. If he doesn't sit in his armchair, kind of semi-relaxed back, the minute he leans forwards, he gets pooling of secretions, and that pools into the mask. But we spent a long time, you know, use it beside the fire in your riser recliner chair where you're tilted back. The room is a little bit drier. All of those things that feed into it. I suppose, you know, being comfortable with managing the symptoms from your patients, it is an issue, but it's not something I see a lot. You know, it is something I see, but not that frequent. It's overcomable with good symptom management control.
All right, if there's any more questions, you're going to have to find Katie afterwards. But
thank you.
Thank you so much. It was very interesting and a great model. Next, we'd like to invite up Philippa Sharp with No One Size Fits All, the different demands of head and neck supports.
Now I feel like a rock star. Thank you. Thank you. Bonjour. My name is Philippa. I'm a specialist occupational therapist. Sorry. Thank you. I'm a specialist occupational therapist working out of Oxford in the UK. And I'm here to talk to you about the issue of head and neck support. So we know that this is an issue for many of the patients that we support. The neck weakness the dropped head syndrome. It's a really difficult one to overcome. Some people can have it kind of more severe than others. I'm sure you can think of many people that you've seen where it's tricky. The current collars on the market, they either go for the very, very soft collars for a bit more comfort, a little bit of support, to the very, very rigid collars. And the main objective is to hold the head in position and support it. They're designed to limit the movement of the head. Some of the collars do have some slight flexibility within them. So you can kind of speak, you can eat if there's a little bit of flexibility, but it is pretty tricky. And many people describe feeling them too restrictive, causing other complications where they can't fully eat, they can't fully communicate. There's a risk of, if you prescribe them too early, a risk of increasing muscular weakness. And people report that they would like to wear them more if only they were more comfortable. So I wanted to talk to you today about 3 examples where we came across difficult functional needs where we needed to think a little bit differently. So I'd like to introduce you to Mrs. A. She has MND, ALS, or actually MND, because she's had it for over 20 years. She has had significant head drop. She's incredibly kyphosed in the thoracic spine, and she's got musculoskeletal changes. I am never going to be able to support her head into a fully upright, neutral position. It's just not going to happen. There's too many changes that have occurred, and she's getting significant pain if I try and do that. She's still mobile, so she's still walking. And she has tried every single collar that is out there multiple times, and she just hasn't got on with any of them. We were trying different collars, and we could, because her head was so significantly dropped, we could kind of just about squeeze some in under the gap, but it was just causing too much pain and too uncomfortable. I found a little gel pad, so I tried that with her, but that was too hard. So what do? I'm an OT, I get out my sewing machine. So I arrayed my stash of fabric. I found some Lycra that I had lying around. I found some stuffing from an armchair cushion that I'd taken out from another patient. And I create this little foam pad. So it's fairly basic, right? I create a little zip at the front so we can kind of adjust the amount of foam that goes in. She's got a really slim, slender neck, so the strap doesn't need to be huge. We stick some Velcro on it, we give it a go. And she's very patient with me as we try different configurations and different shapes. I'm going to try and shape it to her neck as best I can. So this is Mrs. A. I apologize, you probably can't see it that well because I color coordinated it to her outfit. But it is in there. So her quote was, she had to take some filling out because it was causing pain in her jaw. So it's better with less filling. So the zip idea worked, yay. She said, I try not to move my head around too much because if I do, then it pushes it around. And if I try and tighten it, it pushes against her throat and makes her cough. So she wears it for parts of the day, not all of the day, and she wears it when she's in her wheelchair. And she says it's better than nothing at all. and she thanks me for my efforts. And I thank her for her patience, because she, she really was very patient. So it's not perfect. It doesn't tick all of the boxes, but it's a step in the right direction. So next I want to introduce you to Mr. C. He has some heads and he has some pretty good neck control, but it's as the day goes on, he gets more fatigued, it becomes more difficult to control. And for Mr. C, he needs to look down in his lap to use his phone as his communication aid. He also wants to drive his powered wheelchair and look at where he's going. And he wants to look on the shelves in the shop, and multiple head positions were needed. The collars, again, they're going to hold your head in a fixed position and is not going to allow for that flexibility. So it's either he can communicate or he can see where he's going, but not both. Not great, right? So I liaised with a charity called Remap, and they're a UK-based charity who are a mix of engineers, OTs, volunteers, who try and come up with bespoke solutions where there's nothing that already exists on the market. So we did a joint visit to Mr. C. What do you know? He likes to wear hats. It's not a regular question I ask people that I work with, but we discovered that. He can just about reach up to put a hat on, and he has just enough strength to move his head forward and pull away from his headrest on his wheelchair if he needs to. So Remap came up with the solution of putting magnets in the back of his hat and magnets on the back of his headrest. So when he wants to, puts the hat on, connects with his headrest, he's got just enough strength to then pull away and look down when he needs to. And I love the picture. He titled the picture on the left called The Invisible Man. So Miss S now. So she has ALS. She spends most of her day in a powered wheelchair, and she has very limited functional movement. She uses eye gaze technology, and she has incredibly weak neck muscles. And her head falls forward as well as back. It's incredibly weak, probably one of the weakest necks that I've seen. She needs to be able to chin tuck to swallow her saliva, and she still likes to take small spoonfuls of liquids. And she needs to chin tuck to be able to swallow that. But once her head is down to do that, she can't lift her head back up to then use her eye gaze and be in that comfortable position. So she has to rely on her carers to come and do that for her by literally pushing on her forehead to lift her head back up. Remap to the rescue again. So I call up Remap with, if I'm honest, I thought it was a bit of an impossible ask. I thought, what are they going to come up with that can solve this issue? I had underestimated Remap. I met the amazing Derek Jones, who is a retired engineer, who spent so long and various prototypes in order to try and come up with a solution that would help Miss S. So he came up with the idea of a 3D printed frame with a motor to help lift up her head. And we were thinking about, okay, that's great. She can have a motor to help kind of lift her head up. How is she going to control that? She had a little bit of adduction in her knees. So we were able to link a a switch that sat between her knees. So when she wanted to maneuver her head down, little squeeze of the knees, the frame went down, little squeeze of the knees, and it popped back up again. So if you can kind of see how this works, I think I was hoping that there might have been a video link so you could see it in action. But yeah, so that's in the up position. She squeezes her knees and it lowers down. And then she just squeezes and it lifts it back up, which, yeah, was amazing. 3D printing, who knew? So my learnings. We really need to understand what somebody wants to do before we can start to work out best ways of how to support them. And recognizing that people use we use our heads in different ways. We put them in different positions for different things, and we need to work out, okay, what positions do we need our head in? There might be different head supports for different tasks and different times of day, and we need to think creatively. And I know my way around a sewing machine. I know nothing about 3D printing. It blows my mind, don't understand it at all, but I know someone who does. And patience and perseverance, this is a really tricky one to try and overcome. There are no perfect solutions, and one size doesn't fit all. And just a huge thank you to Mrs. A, Mr. C, and Miss S for allowing me to share their pictures, to Remap, the charity, and particularly to Derek Jones, Gordon, Neil, and Philippa, not me, I'm not thanking myself, there's another Philippa, for volunteering their time and expertise, and just the sponsors who helped me to come here today. Thank you.
Thank you. That was really great. Like everyone you were describing, we could all, I think, in the audience say, oh, yes, I know that person. And now I have an idea. I think we all want a remap, too.
Yes.
So what questions do we have over here?
Hi, my name's Steve, husband carer. Since I'm not an engineer, just an accountant, I had to go use pantyhose. So as you can see, Leanne is held up by pantyhose on her headrest, 40 denier. It's very important, and the color is important.
Yes.
Black is too slippery, blue is just fine. I was just wondering, and we couldn't find any OTs that could help us, so I had to come up with something. Are those remap frames available?
I wish that they were. They make one-off bespoke solutions, and I kind of wish that they would patent some of them and get them out there to other people. But as far as I'm aware, they just don't do that. They just make the particular thing that person needs and then move on. But I'm sure they would be happy to share information. I have Derek's full design, and the steps that he went through with me. If anyone's interested in kind of geeking out around 3D printed stuff.
Question online?
Yes, thank you. From Helen Carey at the University of St. Augustine for Health Sciences. Thank you for this. The individuality of each of these supports is superb. What are the issues with the head-up collar, formerly known as Sheffield Schnood? I remember this being extensively trialed to positive impact in 2011.
Yeah, the Sheffield Schnood, the head-up support, I know I was doing a teaching session with some orthotists last month, and I think there are people that it really suits, and people do like it. Again, it's just horses for courses. I think the material The size of it can be very off-putting for many people. The temperature of it, people can get quite hot. So I think with a lot of these things, there is no perfect solution, and it is trying a lot of the different things that are out there. So no shade on the Sheffield snood, but it's not for everybody.
Yeah, I think the individuality of these are what's so important. Down here, Ricardo?
Hello, I'm Ricardo again. Thank you for your interesting talking. I was wondering if you have experience in your unit about the use of HeadPod. Do you know HeadPod? Because maybe it could be again a good solution.
Yeah, I haven't actually used it with any of the patients that I've worked with, but I am aware of it. It's the one with the strut at the back, and then it holds the head. Yes. Yeah, I've not used it personally. I don't know if others in the room have used it a lot, but the HeadPod. Some frantic Googling on there now, I think.
Hi, it's Rachel. I've got the privilege of working with Phil in Oxford, and I guess I just wanted to comment that I'm sure it was completely obvious to everyone in the room, but just quite how profound the sort of psychological care Phil gave with each of those examples of attending to the individual. So not just the solution for the head, but for the heart as well in a little bit. So thanks, Phil.
Thank you.
Thank you, and I think that's a good way to end this session then. Thank you. And yes, we all love the attention you paid. Next up, I'd like to invite Tony Vitale for ALS Steering Wheel. And bonus person.
So good morning. My name is Kendra Berry. I'm an occupational therapist.
And I'm Tony Vitale, but let me be clear, she really is the brains behind this, all right?
OT power. Okay.
Yeah.
ALS is an illness that is often associated with loss of function, independence, and control. It challenges patients, caregivers, and healthcare providers. It's an illness that forces adaptation, sometimes on a daily basis. For a patient with ALS, driving is an IADL that is among the earliest functional activities that requires attention. It is a very delicate issue to address. Over the last 6 years in addressing driving with the patients followed in our clinic, we asked them to define what driving meant for them. The answers included a resounding freedom and independence, but answers also included going to work, visiting an adult child in foster care, going to the library, getting a loved one an ice cap, taking a child to soccer practice. These answers demonstrate themes of caregiving, productivity, and quality of life. When first addressing driving with a patient, I start by asking, do you drive? When the answer is yes, my immediate follow-up question is, when is the last time you drove? Because it's not uncommon for a patient to say 1, 2 years ago. While the patient has likely retired from driving, there remains that important connection to the activity. That photo ID, even if expired, represents an important component of their identity and self-worth.
So as Kendra just mentioned, many of the patients do drive in clinic. It's a delicate issue to discuss, and finding where it fits in with all the other information that we're discussing with them can be challenging. prior to the implementation of this project, we found that we did not have a standardized approach to discuss driving with patients. And we found that the cessation of driving was different for each patient, sometimes detrimental to their mental health or to that of their caregiver. We also found that patients were not consistently advising the driving authority of their new diagnosis, that patients were underusing provincial car adaptation programs to prolong driving. And lastly, that patients were not reporting in clinic changes in their ability to drive, any recent accidents or traffic violations. And when driving was addressed in clinic, the conversation was usually led by the neurologist and/or the occupational therapist. If an evaluation was required, there were delays to access public sector on-road evaluations varying from 3 to 12 months. In turning to the literature for guidance, we found there was very little published. About 2% of articles on driving took into consideration people with ALS. And it was very difficult to identify any clear thresholds for when initial and repeat on-road evaluations need to be done. So with all this in mind, our goal was to create a standardized approach for driving evaluation for all patients that were driving in clinic. The approach had to respect the provincial body guidelines. It had to involve the multidisciplinary team. It had to be quick and easy to administer in clinic. And we had to establish guidelines of when patients need to be referred for on-road evaluations and adaptations. So the beauty and strength of the clinic is really the multidisciplinary team, each of us using our own expertise to provide patients with input. The concept of the steering wheel as a visual representation for the Driving Quality Improvement Project resulted from a brainstorming session and made perfect sense in light of the subject matter. But more importantly, as we also saw in all the other presentations this morning, I was really, always moved and touched. It's really the patient that sits, or the person with ALS that sits in the center of the steering wheel, surrounded by the members of the team. Our goal was to address driving in a client-centered manner, which allowed the patient to be the decision maker, respected, informed, valued, and empowered. Each of us has a role to play.
So the ALS steering wheel is a tool that we developed and implemented in our clinic. It addresses areas that include medical, physical, cognitive, functional, and socio-spiritual components. These areas take into account the complexities of the ALS diagnosis and are in keeping with our Canadian and provincial guidelines. Many of the physical and cognitive tests that we used were from a tool called the GRIMPS. And this tool was used in a driving study in the US in 1998 to identify at-risk drivers. It was the Maryland Pilot Older Driving Study. From this study, 6 out of 9 of their tests in the GRIMPS were identified as having predictive value for patients at risk for crash. And they provided 2 types of cut points, a prevention and an intervention. When an intervention cut point was reached, this indicated that further investigation, like an on-road, was needed. For the ALS steering wheel, we took 7 tests from the GRIMPS. We added a medication review, a questionnaire, the ALS-FRS, the MRC dyspnea scale, grip strength, and the ALS-CBS. As you can see on the worksheet, you see the different team members that are able to perform the test, as well as identified prevention and intervention cut points. Once a patient attained 2 prevention cut points or 1 intervention cut point, we strongly considered proceeding with an on-road evaluation.
So since 2018, the research grant from ALS Canada has funded over 48 driving evaluations. The funds were used to cover a private on-road evaluation with an occupational therapist and a driving monitor. Since the patients have the professional evaluations required, they can then tap into provincial programs for car adaptations to prolong driving. Patients can also access driving lessons to learn how to drive with the new adaptations if needed. Without the private on-road evaluations and a 3 to 12-month waiting list for a public on-road, patients were rarely able to use the services of the provincial adaptation program. So we have complete data on 48 evaluations. Of those 48, 12 patients passed, 30 passed with conditions, and 6 failed. From Kendra's presentation of the tool, it's important to remember that once a patient met 2 cut points for prevention or 1 cut point for intervention, an on-road evaluation was recommended. The most common intervention cut points which led to an on-road evaluation were hand grips, foot tap, and arm reach. It's possible that some patients actually met 2 cut points. With regards to the ALS-FRS-R scores, ranges were similar in all categories, so it was not necessarily a good predictor of driving ability. And with regards to the recommendations for those patients that passed with conditions, the evaluator recommended that the patient can only drive a vehicle with an automatic transmission, power brakes, and power steering. In addition to these recommendations, some of the minor adaptations recommended were spinner knobs, convex mirrors, and extended secondary controls. Major adaptations that were recommended were switching accelerator and brake control to hand controls, and an adapted steering which required reduced effort. It is interesting to note that the technology in new cars, such as a push-button start and power wipers, have actually had a positive impact on prolonging driving in patients with ALS.
So for the tool, I think we could say it was fairly easily integrated into our clinical practice. It is very complete. It can be administered in whole or in parts. For example, if 1 or more intervention cut point was met and an on-road was indicated, we did not necessarily administer the entire battery. Conversely, if after completing the entire battery, if there were no red flags and no cut points, we did not recommend further evaluations. Additions to the tool could be an exertion scale for patients to self-assess their fatigue level during the entire driving activity, as well as mindfulness exercises to prepare and facilitate for the eventual retirement from driving. We had 1 patient that had passed an on-road and had adaptations identified. Due to a lengthy approval process, a repeat on-road was requested. By this time, the patient had significantly physically deteriorated and was struggling with not pursuing the reassessment and was visibly saddened by the situation. As a way to help the patient, I presented a mindfulness exercise, naming 1 negative aspect of being a passenger and 2 positives. So the negative aspect was the loss of a cherished activity. The first positive was being able to coach their partner to improve their driving skill as passenger. The second one was being thankful to be alive each time arriving at a destination with their partner driving. The moment was magic, the tears became laughter, and in that moment we saw the patient pivot. In addition to the tool, a right AFO, there seems to be a consensus among OTs in the rehab centers that needs to be evaluated because it needs to potentially become a condition on the permit. So for that reason, the wearing of a right AFO in driving should be an added intervention cut point. The involvement of the multi-D team was certainly challenged in COVID, and since we implemented this, we've seen several staff changes. We definitely did expand involvement from beyond the doctor and the OT to increase implication from the nurse, the speech therapist, and the administrative agent. One special accomplishment for our speech therapist was ALS Quebec, allowing them to provide the patients that drove and had speech changes quicker access to that diagnosis card for their wallet. So as Tony mentioned, we used our funds from ALS Canada to subsidize private OT evaluations. The use of the private OT allowed for quick access to on-roads. The average delay was 2 weeks, whereas in our rehab centers, it's anywhere from 3 to 18 months. The private OT was able to start the process for government-funded adaptations. We had quick and consistent and rapid access to the driving evaluation reports, which really helped expand our understanding of the driving process and the adaptations possible. One limitation we did encounter is when patients needed an on-road with an already adapted vehicle, that needed to go through the rehab stream. The other thing that we came to realize is the private OT was wonderful, but their involvement was finite. So once the evaluation was done, the file was essentially closed.
So since the implementation of the project, we have been able to address driving in a systematic manner with all patients that come to clinic. We've been able to tap into provincial adaptation program to prolonged driving. We've also raised awareness with the community partners regarding prioritizing evaluations for people with ALS regarding driving. As a result of this new sensitization, the community partners were willing to share their resources to accommodate areas where longer wait times occurred, allowing the person with ALS to go outside of their region of care to get a timely evaluation. Most of the community partners were rehabilitation centers, and they already had very clear short mandates for programs with people with ALS, resulting in a closure of file at the end of the program. So this is no longer the case. The rehab center will now keep the file of the person with ALS open and is aware that as the illness progresses, that the patient may return for a driving evaluation at a later date.
So recommendations to the field. I think it's really important that the healthcare providers have a clear understanding of what their local driving guidelines are, understanding their role in counseling and evaluating patients, knowing also the resources that are available with delays and costs, and knowing alternate methods of transportation that exist. The approach needs to be systematic and consistent, and this is absolutely facilitated by multi-D involvement. It's important that driving be addressed early, closely monitored, smooth process, and ensure a safety net. Also, the driving authority needs to have a clear and systematic approach to managing patients with ALS and driving in collaboration with the healthcare providers involved. The implementation of the steering wheel with the generous support of ALS Canada was a positive experience for our patients, families, and our team. We were able to attain our primary goal of prolonging and promoting driving safety. We were able to provide patients with a sense of function, independence, and control. And now we have a short video. So there's a spinner knob on the wheel, and the patient is actually with their right hand controlling gas brake. You're missing a swear word here because the poor patient was cut off. So you see the ramp coming up. There's a swivel seat. And this patient has had adaptations for driving since 2016, 2017. And this is a recent video. Patient is driving with AFOs, and you have the spinner knob on the wheel. Which allows for one-handed driving, and it also facilitates turning. So in wrapping up, there are a couple of special thank yous. Christiana Salmon, who's here today, who is the driving force with us in this endeavor. A special thank you to Norm McIsaac and our other patient, Jean-Roch Mathieu, that were our superstars in the movie videos, our doctors, our team, the private OT that helped us with the evaluations, and of course the local rehab centers. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Kendra and Tony. Are there any questions? The front here.
Sarah Maguire from ALS Canada. One of the clients that I work with had the dual diagnosis of ALS and FTD. His ALS symptoms were very minimal, so it was largely the FTD that was the problem. And as we know, it doesn't necessarily manifest in some of the ways that a general cognitive test might catch. He was able to tell me lots of things. His memory was fine, but he could no longer understand road signs. So when I'm thinking about the cognitive piece, is it general or is it focused on some of the elements of FTD?
Well, I think it's something, the tool that we use is the ABS, the CBS, as well as the Trail Making B. And those are looking at executive function, attention, working memory. When there's issues with that, that's what we use as a screening tool to bring them to the on-road. In a patient with cognitive difficulties, as per the Canadian medical guidelines, moderate to severe cognitive impairment is contraindicated to driving. So the screening tools are a dépistage, it's a way to start, but if they're very, very cognitively impaired, they should maybe not be driving. That being said, the gold standard for any road test, for driving is a road test. It's the best way to assess them. They put them in the situations with the left turns, with the driving signs. They do the highway. They do everything to really see how they're able to manage cognitively.
Okay, thank you.
Hello, Linda Levine. I'm caregiver to the amazing David Busick. And we have a van like Norm's, etc. I just love what you've done because this is a conversation David and I have had about how will we know when he's no longer safe. So that's amazing. And I just wanted to add to the conversation, when people are asking me away from David how he's doing, the second question is, can he still drive? So you addressed what it means to him, but it means something to the general public who knew nothing about ALS. Driving seems to really tell them something, and I have no idea what that is.
I mean, I think that ALS patients in our clinic will probably tell you they're the most evaluated patients for driving in the world. But no, I mean, I think there's no way of knowing, but I think there is a sense. We have the patients that want to pursue it. If they want to pursue it, we put them to the test and see if they're able to do it. I think a general sense is there's a natural retirement to driving. There comes a point when the patients no longer feel safe, and I think that's probably how most of them do retire, naturally.
But I think we should share what the literature did tell us is that neurologists and spouses will often overestimate the capacity to drive, but adult children will usually be good judges.
Yeah.
We're ending here, but I don't know if David wants to say something back to his wife.
No, I wouldn't publicly say anything back to her. But your last comment makes me glad we don't have adult children. I really have two questions. One is if you have a good source for purchasing adaptive equipment like spinner knobs and spinner knobs in particular. I imagine a hand controls you'd have to go through some sort of formal agency, but for the spinner knobs or other lower level things like that, are there good resources you've found? And the other question is about my biggest concern with driving right now is the ability to get in and out of the vehicle quickly if I need to in an emergency situation. And I wonder if you have anything to say about that.
Okay, so for the first one, the access to the adaptations was done through our private OT. I do believe Norm could add, but I think it's Savaria. There's somewhere on the West Island that deal with all of that. In terms of getting in and out of the car, that is something that is part of the OT evaluation when they're assessing the on-road. So there are bars that might be able to be like almost like a grab bar to help in and out. There are those things that could be added and are definitely looked at.
All right, this is obviously a very interesting and filled with a lot of different levels of anxiety and questions, but we need to move on. But thank you so much for providing us with this presentation today. And again, feel free to reach out to them at the breaks and at lunch. Up next, we have Krista McMillan, Beth Knowles, and Marla Calder with Interdisciplinary Clinic Care Model Powered by Patients.
Good morning, everyone. We're really excited to be here and to share how we evaluated our clinic's adherence to best practice guidelines. And we want to share the process and tools that we developed to maximize the care for our patients with ALS. We work at the Stan Cassidy Center for Rehabilitation, which is out on the East Coast in Fredericton, New Brunswick. I'm Krista McMillan. I'm an occupational therapist. We also have Marla Calder, who's an occupational therapist in assistive technology, and Beth Knowles, our respiratory therapist. So our team works out of a rehabilitation center, and we have a great multidisciplinary team that works with our clients. And in the clinic, we have physiatry with respiratory therapy, occupational therapy and physiotherapy, assistive technology OT, augmentative communication SLP, and outpatient nurse. We have a research coordinator and research nurse that are also involved with our PALS, and we have a new clinical coordinator, which we're really excited about. We can also refer in other disciplines as needed, so recreation therapy, psychology, social work. We have an adaptive driving or driver rehabilitation program and a seating department that does complex wheelchairs. We're blessed in New Brunswick to have a great community program called the Extramural Program, and they see our clients in their homes, and we work closely with their team. And their team includes OT, PT, SLP, RT, dietetics, social work, nursing. So for today, what we're hoping you'll get out of our presentation is to learn a method that you can use to evaluate your clinic's adherence to best practice guidelines, describe different care management tools and resources that can be used in a clinic to support PALS, their families, and their care, and we're very happy to share our resources. Learn when to use various platforms for PALS-centered interventions, and describe knowledge transfer processes to the community care partners. So, we wanted to ensure quality care for patients. So in our yearly review, what we did is we did an analysis of our clinic. The method we used was to analyze our clinic's adherence to the best practice, Canadian best practice recommendations for the management of ALS. And we went through each guideline to determine our level of adherence and where we were experiencing gaps and challenges. And we listed those gaps, and we really worked on creating a roadmap to address these and plan kind of what were our next steps to maximize patient care. So we looked at our gaps and our solutions, and we're figuring out how do we prioritize these. And so we really looked at the impact it would have and the effort it would take to do these, although you can also look at impact, urgency, various factors. And then the different tasks were assigned to different members of our ALS team. And we started with solutions that were low effort but had a high impact and worked from there. So in the next part of our presentation, we want to share with you what were our gaps and challenges and what are some of the solutions and resources we came up with to maximize quality of care. So we're going to be talking about a few things such as our recommendation sheet with a checklist, different handouts, a binder that was created, a lending cupboard, looking at our clinic schedule and what's best for our pals and their families, our need for a clinic coordinator, our need for looking at cognitive assessments within the clinic, and also education sessions for our community partners and allied health.
So I'll talk about some of our challenges and the solutions that we came up with to solve these challenges. And one of them was the fact that we didn't have a lot of printed information to provide to our patients. So we developed a patient resource binder, which we give to our patients usually at their first full clinic visit, but we usually like them to be aware of their diagnosis before we provide them with the binder. The binder includes all of our team information, who we are, our names, what our roles and responsibilities are, and our health professional designation. We provide information to them for how to contact the ALS Society, and then we will also provide room in the binder for them to place their recommendation sheets that we provide to them after each clinic visit. And then that way they can share that information with any of their community or home care providers. So one of the things we provide to our patients, like I mentioned, is the recommendation list. And we provide this so that our patients will have written information to take home with them, so that after each of us sees the patient at their clinic visit, I'll write my recommendations, and I'll also include in it what my job is, if I'm going to refer them to a local provider, or how to go about getting something like maybe a suction machine if they need portable suction at home. And it also addresses the issue of possibly patients maybe being uncomfortable bringing up certain concerns with us. So we added the checklist at the top. So as you can see, there are a number of items there that they can check off. So they have a few minutes at the beginning of each clinic where they can tick off the subjects they want to talk about. And that way we don't miss anything, and things that they might want to mention in front of like their neighbor who drove them to the appointment or a friend, they can just tick it off on the sheet, and then we'll discuss it with them. And at the end of the visit, we'll photocopy our list of recommendations, and we keep a copy on the chart, and then the patient takes that home with them, and in case they forget anything, they have it all written down for their home care workers to review with them. We also, like Krista mentioned, developed the lending cupboard, and that's so that patients can access adapted equipment that they might need right away. As you know, sometimes when we see new patients living with ALS, they can be in different stages of the disease process when you meet with them. So they may need something like right away. Sometimes I will have to get like CPAP or BiPAP started like within 24 hours. But usually for some of the other equipment like hand splints, collars, Dictus braces, even just a boogie board for them to be able to communicate better, for them to write their notes, we can provide that to them on the day of their clinic visit. And in addition to that, for any equipment that is available for purchase, we've added the option of them being able to use like a credit or a debit card so that they can just purchase the equipment right away. So one of the big things that we identified when we reviewed our best practice recommendations and our needs and gaps, we really felt that a clinic coordinator would make things so much easier for scheduling and organization. So we hired a new clinic coordinator, and we have a schedule template which makes it much easier for the scheduling, that they just sort of put in the patient name, and then right away all the times are set out for who sees the patient at which time. Our patients used to be scheduled for a full day visit, which was very long, and it was exhausting and tiring for everyone. And the patients would come to the clinic and they would go to each of our areas and see us. But now we put the patient in one spot and we all go and we see them. So the burden is on us to get to them on time, not for them to try to find us. So the first visit is usually, when we receive a new referral, we try to get those patients in as soon as we can, and we often can get them in within 2 weeks. Their first visit is always with myself, a respiratory therapist, and with the physician. That usually ends up being a 2 to 3 hour visit, and I can do my respiratory testing, I can do my vital capacity, my slow vital capacity, MIPS, MEPS, SNPs, peak cough flow, and then that way we can get treatment started like right away if we need to. And also the doctor then knows what drug trials or medications that they qualify for or are eligible to receive, and we can get it started, like we can get the paperwork started right away. So there's not as much a delay in them receiving the required or the necessary treatment. And usually at that visit with myself and the physiatrist, the patient gets their next visit, which is usually scheduled within 1 month for them to come and have their first clinic visit with the entire multidisciplinary team. And another thing we identified is that we didn't have any formal way or any formal method of cognitive testing. So Krista, our OT, did training and became certified in the Edinburgh Cognitive and Behavioral ALS screen. So she does that testing quite often, and she can do it virtually or in person, and that's been a fantastic addition for us to have available to us. So Marla's going to speak next.
We definitely brought the whole team. So some of what I will say will probably be a little bit repetitive. As we mentioned, we've tried to make it so it's a little more comfortable because people are there for a long time. And we have areas instead of just a clinic room now where it's a little bit more homey, so people can sit on a couch. They can move around. There's bathrooms in those areas. There's more space. They can bring family members if they would like. The other thing we offer is, again, we can do virtual, which I've heard a lot of people be able to do that now. So if travel is tough, I know where we are in the winter, that sometimes is a big issue, but sometimes it's just travel is just too fatiguing. So we can offer that, but it also gives the chance for other people who maybe don't live close by to also be able to join the session because they can join virtually now. And then, of course, there's outreach. So for us, I would say we have a lot of rural areas, but you can drive anywhere between 3 and 4 hours away. So oftentimes, if that's what's best, we pack up the car and off we go, and we'll see a patient in their home. And as Krista already mentioned, because we are out of our neuro rehab, we actually have some extra specialty options, I guess. So the Kiwanis House for us is apartments that are accessible, so you can come in and you can stay the night, and if that's easier because you are driving from 4 hours away, you can stay there. You can consult with our adaptive seating service. We have our driving service there. We have special places with equipment like the Smart Home Suite, which is very similar to what you'll see upstairs, where people can see and try different things that allow them to control their homes. And we also have the adaptive gaming service. Another area that we identified during our planning day was the support for professional learning within our community. So different team members have taken this on in different ways. Some have gone and spoken at the med schools and the respiratory therapy schools. We've done a virtual ALS conference, multidisciplinary conference for, I think, mainly the east coast of Canada. Probably 3 to 4 of those provinces were involved. They could log in and we all presented different things. The development of the ALS quick guide for occupational therapists, and again, plug in for the Day in the Life suite. There's lots of those upstairs if you want to grab those guides in French and English. So as much as we can, we try to get involved with education where we can with our community partners. And I think, anecdotally, I think this has led to actually some earlier referrals, which we know is important. If we can talk to people sooner and get that information out there, that's usually better. So I guess in general, the format, we have the checklist, and so a shout out to what this is supposed to be about, where we don't reinvent the wheel. Our checklist came from attending this conference virtually. We heard something and everybody was online, and as a team we pulled together, and that's where that checklist came from, and put it at the top of our recommendation sheet so that it normalizes things and people can direct what they want to talk about on that particular day. So that's why we certainly appreciate and certainly support this conference. We try to see people and their families every 3 to 6 months, whatever kind of fits for them. And we try and check in really often as a team. So we try to check in with either pre or post clinic day meetings so that we know what's happening, we know what we're doing moving forward. And then, as we mentioned, yearly we all try to get together as a team. We look at best practices, new things that we've heard at conferences, and try and implement those into our clinics as best as we can. Questions?
Well, you know, I love to hear that. They heard something here and they took it back and they're implementing it. I like what you just said about the team conferences too. Team, do you hear me? They're not even paying attention. That you then try and share that information. Questions here?
I have the microphone. Hi, over here.
Oh,
Melinda Kavanaugh from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee in the US. I had a question. So looking at your staffing, and we talked about this briefly, I noticed you didn't have a social worker, and neither did you have psychology. And looking at your list of questions or issues that patients identified as important, nothing around family or talking to family or family issues. And I'm just wondering if those types of things rose to the top as you're discussing kind of creating your clinic and adapting? Thank you.
So we actually do a lot with family. As Marla mentioned, a lot of times we'll do even virtual sessions outside of clinic where family could be in Ontario or wherever, and they'll join in those education sessions. And we do encourage family to come to clinic as well. But we've actually flagged talking about social work, psychology supports for this year, a few of us. They do have support through social work through extramural program in our community, which is great. And we unfortunately only have a very 2 days a week support of social work for all of our outpatient programs. So that is something that will be on the list to look at as well.
I think that's where that prioritization matrix, so when it was identified, we know it's an issue, but it's, what is it, high effort, high, yeah, it's up there. So it is continually on our list, and so as we continue to plug away each year and pick away at the best practices, you're right. It is something that we're missing though right now. We can refer out when needed, whether it's within the Stan Cassidy Center or we do reach out with our community partners to try and address what we can. Yeah, but good point.
Hey, Sarah, in the back, Rick. I love that presentation. I love all the thought that you put into your clinic to make it more evidence-based. So one thing that I've thought a lot about in the past year is hope. You know, across every disease where it's ever been studied, people that are more hopeful do better medically. than people who are less hopeful. They have less symptom burden, they have higher quality of life, fewer hospitalizations, they live longer. But we don't spend a lot of time in our clinics thinking about how to be good hope boosters. And so I noticed you start off with a checklist, which is really all complaints. Like and it's important, we need to know all that stuff, but we started the conversation in our clinic now with, tell me 2 or 3 things you're hopeful about today. Changes the whole view of what the visit's apart. The other thing is, we all make a lot of measurements in the clinic. We have to, because the measurements are what we use to decide when to offer different evidence-based interventions. The measurements are needed for insurance companies that pay for the things that we get. But the measurements are often worse each time, which can be very difficult for patients and families to see. So what if we always incorporated a measurement that didn't have to get worse? For example, there's something that was invented by a person with ALS called the ALS Turbocharged Living Scale. And it measures the best parts of people, their humor, their kindness, their compassion, their advocacy. And when you put that up next to the ALS FRSR and you show them, hey, the motor function's going down, but look at all these other parts of you that are so much more important. They're flourishing. It's just such a great hope booster for people. So think about that kind of stuff.
Thank you for that. We'll make sure it's on our review for this year, which is coming up in a few weeks.
All right, let me just get the one online, and then there's one.
Last question. From Deborah Taylor at Barrow. How many clients do you see in a day? 4. Thank you.
We see 2 in the morning and we see 2 in the afternoon.
Yeah, we have time for one over.
I was going to say, if things aren't able to be addressed in clinic, then different disciplines will schedule time outside of clinic as well to be able to address those needs. And I forgot to bring it up, but I do have an example of our binders and a few of our handouts that we did, and we're happy to show them if anyone's interested. And the ALS guide is up in the Day in the Life suite.
I did promise this one question over here. Sorry.
Thank you. Lisa Marie from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I work both for the ALS Association as a care service manager, but I also work at our clinic as a social worker. And so I had a question about your pre-clinic or post-clinic, like evals, like how do you get that in? How do you group together? I think that's so important. I'd love us to be able to do a better job at that. And second, I just want to thank Dr. Bedlock for the turbocharged living. We use that in support group, and that is a great tool.
Do we have time?
One thing we try to do as a team is meet before clinic and meet after. So right now we meet with one of the physiatrists in the morning prior to clinic to discuss past visits, current clients we're seeing, plan for the following clinic, and then the other physiatrist in the afternoon to be able to do the same thing. And I do think that meeting as a group really is beneficial. We support each other as healthcare professionals. We're able to discuss the individual as a whole, to know what's everyone working on, what's the plan, what's next steps.
All right, and actually there is one more online.
It's not a question, well, it is a big question, actually. Would you be open? It's from Orlando Ruiz in ACE LA. Would you be open to training our medical team at ACE LA on this model? We're eager to learn directly from you and would be happy to travel for in-person guidance.
Absolutely. Can we come to them, though?
Marcella says yes. All right, thank you very much. And thank you for the Day in the Life suite, everything you have up there. And again, another encouragement to go up there and see what they provided. So next is lunch, but there are a few announcements to make before lunch. Announcements. So Monique is running around with red sleeves. She's a photographer. So she also is taking pictures with her cell phone, and if you get her your number, she'll text you the photos then that she takes, so you'll be able to have all those. Don't forget about the raffle. And The SLPs would like to meet. I don't know where they'd like to meet, but they would like to meet. So is there some, right there? They're volunteering right there up front. The PTs would like to meet. Again, we don't know where we want to meet, but we'll say, how about over here? Nobody, the RTs, how many respiratory therapists are there in the room? 2? Okay, the 2 of you meet in the middle here. So those were all the requests I have, but if you all have your own, or you see us gathering, you're like, well, I'm not one of them. Dietitians, you want people way back there? All right. All right, so that's all the groups. Find your own group or make your own group. And that's it. You can now go to lunch. Be back here at 1:45? Is that it, Jess? 1:45. We'd love to see you all back here.